The topic of my presentation is avoiding storming, informing, storming, norming, and performing phases. Any leadership team, project team, we go through phases, and a conceptual model that was developed by Bruce Tuckman many years ago in mid-60s basically provides a conceptual framework of, if you look at team effectiveness on the vertical axis and you look at the time horizon on the horizontal axis, you can see that when the team is formed, they basically get to know each other, they shake hands, introduce themselves, share some information about themselves, and then the team progresses into working on the objectives. And as they progress, as you would expect in most teams, especially if there is complexity, that there will be some level of what Tuckman calls storming process. There are tensions. Now, there are two types of tensions. One could be defined as task tension. That is, team is discussing, even arguing that, hey, are the tasks too aggressive, timeline not realistic? But there is relational tensions. And those relational tensions kind of start to take place, and they get even more magnified if there are task tensions on top of it. And so in the storming phase, teams kind of become a little bit dysfunctional. And through facilitation and through leadership, eventually team will start to get into the norming stage, getting out of the dysfunctional stage and getting into the performing stage. In my experience, if we can figure out a way to minimize the storming phase, we can help the team move quicker, much faster. And one of the ways to do that I have found is that if you can create self-awareness and team awareness, that helps in minimizing the storming phase. So that really is the theme of my presentation today, right now. So in today's session, the session will help you to understand the importance of self-awareness and team awareness, and gain understanding on how to explore the impact of organizational culture and orientation on be the leadership team or a project team in terms of the influence of the culture and the organizational orientation on how to enhance the performance of the team. Now, before I get into my presentation, I just want to share with you some of the tools that I really like to use. These are my go-to tools. I'm just sharing it with you in terms of just a list of tools. After I am done, if you have any questions regarding the tools that I have listed here, or any tool that you feel that you want me to talk about it more after the sessions, I'm happy to do that. My go-to tools are, I like Wiley's disk tools. I mean, there are a lot of disk tools out there, but I do like Wiley's disk tool, and I have a reason for that. And I'm certified for disk tools. I'm certified for the predictive index PI tools. I'm also certified for the EDCAR change management tools. Those are my top 3 go-to tools. In addition, I use the framework on self-awareness by Tasha, emotional intelligence by Danielle Goldman, competitive value framework by Robert Quinn and Kim Cameron. A really good tool. I'll share some of that today. Balanced Scorecard by Kaplan, and 5 Dysfunctions of a Team by Patrick Lencioni. There are others, but these would be my kind of go-to tools when I'm looking at it from an organizational effectiveness, regardless of the size of the organization, size of the team, the type of the leadership, and so on. These tools have kind of help you, depending upon the situation. It's almost using, what prescription you need to fix what problem. These tools do come in handy to do that. Now, so let's take a hypothetical example for this, for this presentation. 2 leaders, Jane and John. Both have similar projects, basically same boundary conditions, time horizon, complexity, budgets, resources, etc. And, both of them realize that there is an importance of making sure there's a clarity on objectives, and there is a clarity on budgets, and clarity on team skills, and clarity on metrics. But Jane also felt strongly that the other parameter that was super important, and that has to do with team dynamic skills and organization alignment skills. She wanted to focus on that, and John decided he does not want to do that. John feels he has done enough projects. He's just going to lay out the Gantt charts and the metrics and the own value and all that stuff, and he's going to manage. Jane decided, I think it is value added for her to be able to spend some time up front with her team, to be able to get into the people skills. So she had her team go through individual and team awareness training. That includes internal, external self-awareness, inference ladder, basically understanding how we jump to conclusion based on our biases, most of our unconscious biases, understanding the behavioral traits of us. How do we behave, and how do we see other people, and what is our perception of other people, and are we looking at other people just through our lens, and how effective is that? Team dynamics, how does the team come together, and also looking at it from an organizational orientation perspective to see, how do we all put it together? Jane felt very strongly that she wants her team to go through that, and she also participated in the team, which obviously the team leader should definitely do that. Now, the facilitator starts out with talking about the importance of alignment. Teams can have goals, the companies can have goals, they can have targets, they can have strategies. But if they can also get organizational and or team alignment, that makes a big difference. So if you can do both, you have a higher probability of success, for successful execution and for team results. And so the team wanted to make sure they kind of focused on the importance of it, because that kind of becomes the foundation conversation, is what do we want to learn about self-awareness, and what do we want to learn about behavioral traits, and all the people skills that are so important, right? Now, if you look at Daniel Goleman's emotional intelligence model, there are 5 pillars, and they're all connected to people skills. But the very first one he talks about in quite a bit of detail in his model is self-awareness. And there has been research done, in, most recently over the last 5 years, on self-awareness. Like, for example, Tasha Eurich and her team conducted a very in-depth, long research that lasted for 5 years and included 5,000 participants. And the study found some very interesting results. 95% of people thought that they were self-aware, but in fact, only 15% were. And as you get deeper into it, and you look to see that there are 2 types of self-awareness. One is the internal self-awareness, how clearly we understand our own needs or behaviors. For example, me, how does me, Mo, understand my behavior? And typically, obviously, as time goes on, especially as we mature, etc., we know a lot about that. It is the second one that is equally important. In some cases, when it comes to work and team dynamics, even more important, is understanding how other people view our behavior. Because I could see my behavior, understand it, my internal self-awareness, but do I understand, especially under stress? Under stress, a real pattern behavior will come out. Typically we can all adapt. We can behave whatever we want, but under stress, we have a hard time adapting. And I think some of that behavioral patterns are going to come out. And so understanding the external self-awareness becomes really, really important. Now, the reality is obviously self-awareness is important, but then how do we operationalize it? How do we go from this conceptual conversation of, hey, self-awareness is important, but what do we do with it? And that's where the personality behavior tools could come in handy. There are quite a few out there that I'm sure you're familiar with or using it. There are a lot of the ones that I like and I use is I'm very familiar with is Wiley's Disk and Predictive Index. Those two are my go-to tools. I'm certified in both of them. I'm also familiar with Social Styles Strecker model, but the top two are the ones that I'm very familiar with. But the science behind all these psychological tools come from, some of the psychological studies that I've done over time, especially if you go back in time, work done by William Marston, a book he wrote, Emotions of Normal People. That was some of the foundation. As you look at the research behind some of these tools and look at where they came from, that's really the foundation of it. And obviously, each software has its own algorithm and own way to kind of present the data, but the psychological science really comes from the same place. Now, so if you kind of start to think about it, so the facilitator did for Jane's team is to kind of have them understand at a conceptual level, what are some of the dimensions? And the two dimensions that are important, one has to do with looking at it through the lens of people focus, and task focus is one dimension. For example, am I relatively more task focused or more people focused? It's not that I'm one and not the other. I can adapt. But under stress, where do I lean towards? What part of the axis am I leaning towards? And that's where our personality behavior traits come in. For example, I am more task focused. Doesn't mean I cannot be people focused. Doesn't mean I cannot interact with people. Obviously I do. But under stress, let's say if I'm starting a meeting and it's very stressful and we are behind project, etc., the odds are very high that I am going to get right into the agenda of the meeting. It's going to be very task focused. Now, if you're somebody that is more people focused on the other side of the spectrum, they, even under stress, they will feel the need to engage with people first, get their energy from the people, and then they're going to start the conversation. And neither end is good, bad, or ugly. It is who we are and how do we adapt to the situation. The other spectrum really has to do with how does me more engage with other people. Am I really kind of very outgoing, just very engaging, or I'm more cautious and reflective? For me, I am relatively more cautious and reflective. Doesn't mean I cannot engage with people. Of course I do. But if I have to be in a job where I have to engage a lot, for example, if I had to be a salesperson, I could do it for a while, but then it's going to, quote unquote, stress me out. So that would be not my career choice to be an external salesperson, because I will not, getting engaging is more for me to adapt and do it because I have to do it either for personal reason, or for family reason, or for work reason. But that does not come very, very natural to me like it is to be able to be reflective, think it through, and so on, right? So now if you kind of think through those four quadrants, so depending upon where a person is, they're going to fall somewhere on this circumplex, right? I'm just going to keep it simple for right now. Obviously Jane's team went through a lot of detail. They all understood each other's patterns, and they were very, very knowledgeable about what's going on. Now, let's take Robert. Let's say Robert is one of the team members. Robert, he likes to, he values getting immediate results and taking actions and, challenging himself and challenging others. In his case, he will fall in what I have on my slide at the left quadrant. Michael, on the other hand, likes to be very engaging, likes to engage with people, likes to collaborate. He would fall in the top quadrant. Margaret likes to very supportive. She likes to engage with people, very collaborative, but she likes stability in terms of not a lot of changes. She will fall on the right quadrant on my slide. And Sabrina, she likes to make sure everything is done right, maintaining accuracy, looking at, and also she will challenge somebody's assumption because she wants to make sure everything is done accurately. She will fall in the bottom quadrant on this slide. Now, what the team also learned, which was obviously very valuable, aside from learning about themselves, to who they are and understanding, whatever report they get from depending upon the software that is used, what is that they like to do. What they found that how they interact with each other, understanding how to interact, how can Margaret interact with Michael? If Margaret understood Michael's pattern and Michael's motivators and stressors, and what drives Michael, and Michael understood the same for Margaret, then the working relationship becomes more cohesive and becomes kind of coalesces and becomes more effective. Similarly, understanding between Margaret and Sabrina, understanding Sabrina with Robert and Sabrina kind of understand each other's patterns. They kind of become more effective in working together, and similarly with Michael and Robert. So as the team learned from each other, they kind of had some aha moments, and they kind of start to realize why Margaret used to see Robert as being too aggressive and too my way or the highway. Whereas now you look at whereas Robert used to think that Margaret, which is on the other side of his quadrant, he thought, she was not aggressive enough, etc., etc. When they started to kind of get to understand each other, they realized that their perception, their inferences were way off. And that really made the big difference. And in the process, they also learned that cutting diagonally in both directions is even more stressful. In the sense, understanding between, say, in this case, the top quadrant where Michael is and the bottom quadrant where Sabrina is, for them to understand each other's patterns, what motivates them, what stresses them, becomes even more important. Similarly with Margaret on the right side of the quadrant and the Robert on the left side. So the team kind of started to realize, we have known each other for a while. Some of them were just starting out to get to know each other. They were thrilled to get a feel for it, and all of a sudden, when they ever got into some kind of a tension in the team, they started to realize, and they would kind of say, okay, I am acting like this kind of a behavior, or I'm acting like this kind of a behavior. And all of a sudden, that what could be a emotional or a relational tension was very easily diffused, and the focus become more on the task on hand, and become task focused, and then become basically more team was working on solving the problem, and not kind of worrying about what other person thinks or feels, etc., etc. So that becomes very powerful for Jane's team. So that resulted in kind of shrinking the storming phase in Jane's team, and they became more effective and all rowing in the same direction. Now, Jane was also aware that it would make it even more effective if she could have her team also understand the impact of where is the organizational orientation and the culture. And so she wanted the facilitator to explain to her team and kind of walk them through a mini workshop on comparative value framework. A framework developed by Quinn and Cameron many years ago, very effective tool. I like it a lot. I'll share with you some of the quote unquote nuances or details of it. And Jane's team used it, and it also helped them coalesce much faster, especially even after they were forming. They could see when the task tension increased, they would kind of fall back into the storming by understanding the individual behavior through understanding their own individual behavior, but now understanding through the cultural lens, they become more effective going forward. Now, so let's look at it at a pretty macro level. What are the dimensions of this comparative value framework? Now, here we are looking at it through the lens of an organization, not individual. So this is the conversation of obviously at the organization level or department level, or and that's how you look at it. So there are two dimensions one would look at it. One is the organizational agility, and the second one is organizational orientation. Now, from an organizational agility point of view, one bookend is the organization very flexible, very easy to change, very change tolerant? Or is it more controlled and more stable and hard to change? And on the other spectrum is organizational orientation is more external, looking at the external stakeholders, looking at the market, looking at the customers, looking at the investors, or looking at an internal focus, which is their people, their systems. Now remember, they're all important for every organization. It's not like one is there and the others are not. It's a question of, depending on the function, the department, the industry, some may be more than the other. So when you take this and now you think in terms of quadrants, the quadrant that is in the middle on the top, the orientation would be more typically where the focus is on innovation and new ideas, trying out new things, kind of out-of-box thinking. For example, if you were a company like a Pfizer, which is in the news a lot, their research department was looking at new drugs or vaccines. That's where they are focusing. Their research department is going to have a much more concentration of innovation and new ideas type of a culture or orientation. The second quadrant on the right would be collaborate. This is where doing things together. Now let's say a drug company that has got research and development and they are into the create innovation quadrant on the top. But their culture does not really encourage collaboration. The reward system is not based on collaboration. It's not based on teamwork, team results. It's based on more individual performance. Odds are very high. That drug company, the focus of the scientist is going to be more individual work and not collaboration. On the other hand, if the culture was collaboration, then the scientists are going to be working together, and obviously they will get a much faster, much better results as they're collaborating, right? The other quadrant on the bottom is where the focus is more on control. You're looking at the processes, this is where your compliance activity, your quality system, they were going to come in, your HR system, the financial systems, those kind of things come in. They're important, but they will kind of fall in that quadrant. And the last piece is going to be, obviously, like Pfizer, they can develop their drugs, they can have collaboration, they will have control. The bottom quadrant, obviously, they want to make sure there is a quality and the efficacy of the drugs and the medicine and all the record keeping that is required. But then, on the compete side, on the left side of the quadrant, they are a business. They want to sell, they got competition, they got market, so they are going to compete, so that's where it's going to belong. So those are the kind of four quadrants you want to think about, and that's where, now obviously every organization is going to have a little bit of everything. I'll give you an example of some organization, say something like a motor vehicle department, right? A motor vehicle department would be more in the control, basically, which means that they are not very creative and they don't really change a lot, or even IRS, right? So that's where it's going to examine. And not that they will not have other pieces collaborate, but they will not have a lot of creative stuff. They're going to be more control focused. Whereas some companies that are mostly in high technology, they're going to have more create, and especially when the companies start out. When the companies start out, they're more in the creative stage. And then they eventually get into, obviously, they have to now make the donuts, so they're going to get into the compete phase, and after that, they're going to get into the control phase. So they go through the life cycle of doing that. So that's how the organizational orientation can change for a new company or a new project as you're transitioning through it. You start out with the creative thinking, innovative thinking, and then you're going to start to kind of get into, okay, now we got to figure out how to make it, how we're going to collaborate it, and how we're going to eventually going to control and have processes to consistently make it. So the whole journey, so it's not a static kind of a thing. Depending on the industry, depending on the company, some may be changing faster than the others, but there will be some transition, and some could be very, very stable. Some organization like, IRS is not going to change a lot. So from that point of view, they're going to be mostly in the control box on the bottom quadrant. Now, so if you kind of start to take this and start to make the connection between the competitive value framework, which is kind of looking at it from an organizational orientation perspective, and then connect with the behavioral traits we talked about to see, somebody in the right quadrant, is it a good fit or not? So, we talked about Michael, we talked to Robert. So let's say we start with Robert. Robert, when we looked at his behavioral pattern, he likes to get immediate results. He likes to take actions. He likes to challenge others. So he would be a good fit if he was in the left quadrant, quote unquote, the orientation where the drive, the cultural drive or the orientation of the organization is to compete and do things fast. Sabrina, her values, what motivated her, she liked ensure accuracy, likes maintain stability, not a lot of change. She would challenge assumptions. So she would be a good fit in the quote unquote the bottom quadrant, which is control. where the focus is on process and doing things right. Margaret, on the right side, her what valued was she liked giving support, enjoying collaboration, maintaining stability. So obviously she would be a good fit. And Michael, who likes to engage and kind of collaborate with people, he will be a good fit in the creative innovation, new ideas. Now, that doesn't mean that you cannot have Margaret do creative work or Robert do creative work or Michael do some collaboration. That's obviously we all adapt and do it. But there will be a natural, quote unquote, 80-20 kind of a thinking that the comfort level is going to be much higher in the quadrant that you are, but you can always adapt and move around from quadrant to quadrant into different levels right now. But again, thinking through diagonally, as I mentioned before, those are the hard ones to cross. If Michael, let's say, decides on his own because of a promotional opportunity, or let's say a company decides to move Michael into a function that, let's say he was in a sales job before. Let me go back. Let's say he was in a sales job before, right? And he was very creative, very engaging. He worked with the customers, good ideas, was very, very successful. And they moved him into a job that requires compliance, quality control, detail. Can he do it? Yeah, he can adapt. But if he has to do it for a very, very long time, he's going to have a hard time with it. And that's why, from a leadership perspective, you always want to kind of start to think through and say, what are we doing from a leadership perspective? Because that sometimes you do see, quote unquote, Peter principle, where you put people in the wrong job, and then all of a sudden they were so good, Michael was so good up here in doing sales, and you put him over here into running a quality department, and he basically after a year will say, this is not for me right now. So you can kind of see, how these two pieces come together: the individual behavior versus the the orientation of the organization. But now let's think about how do we, quote unquote, operationalize this comparative value framework, and how do we put some ways to kind of say, hey, where is it, like on this circumplex, in this case. The authors, who developed this model many years ago, and I'm just sharing with you just a screenshot of one of their books. In there, they have, they define this instrument called organizational cultural assessment tool, OCAI. There, they are looking at, there are a total of 24 questions. And there are 4 of them in each of the 6 categories that are listed on the left of the slide. One is 4 questions are related to what is the dominant characteristics of the organization? What is the organizational glue? How is the management of employees taking place in the organization? What is the organizational leadership? What is strategic emphasis? And finally, what is the criteria of success? So there are 4 questions in each, a total of 24 questions. And based on that, one would then come up with 4 data points, one for compete, create, control, and collaborate. And from there, you can take it and basically come up with where they belong. And then you can kind of visually draw the line and see how they come together. Now I'm going to just kind of digress for a second. The real value that I find consistently in the feedback that I've received when I have done this is the conversation that takes place with the team. So the process, the way I like to use it, is to not put it into some kind of a survey tool, give it to the people and say, hey, go figure it out. I like to do it more pencil and paper, where there are 24 questions, and they will, I walk them through the process, what they're supposed to do. And with the Zoom environment, I would put them in a little bit of quote unquote the teams or 2 people teams or even individually. But the important part is for them to kind of think to say, where is an organization for those categories? And they have to make some tough decisions. They have to rank in each of those 6 dimensions, where there are 4 questions. Each of the 4 questions have to be ranked. So they can't say all are important. They have to rank which is 1, which is 2, which is 3, which is 4. 1 is the most important. That thought process is really, really important at the individual level first. I collect the data, and then looking at the team perspective, And that conversation becomes really, really important because the map could be at a macro average level. But you also want to have a conversation to say, does somebody think, for example, in this hypothetical example, I have, the chart shows the tendency more towards the compete side. But what if there was somebody in the organization who was an outlier and felt that she had put most of her quote unquote emphasis on create, whereas everybody else was more focused on the compete. So that conversation kind of becomes really, really important because that helps the team coalesce. And so when they get aligned, and even though the person that felt the create should be more, once they have the conversation, even at once in a while, I find they would agree to disagree, but they collectively understand the direction they want to go. And that becomes really, really important. So my recommendation always is that it is the facilitation and the conversation among the people. That is the power. That's the power of reducing the storming phase by having your quote unquote team at the leadership level, at a company level, at the departmental level, or at a project level. Having the facilitation conversation that really, really makes the difference in doing that, right? So now you can take it and kind of think of it in many ways. For example, in this hypothetical team, let's say the pattern kind of looks like this. In that case, you can kind of see that the focus for the team collectively is that they want to be more on the left quadrant. But then you kind of start to see where the team people are. And the team leader or the head of the organization, the CEO or the a general manager, or the HR leader, they kind of start to see that maybe there's an opportunity if we want to become more effective to take advantage of this information. And again, I'll be very honest, this is not perfect science. When I say perfect science, this is not like calculus or algebra where you have an answer. This is a leadership behavioral pattern conversation where we kind of look at it from a holistic perspective and get the most benefit out of it. And again, I have seen benefit out of it. So there is a real value there. But the reason I kind of bring it up, some skeptics are going to be there. They're going to say, oh, this is kind of very holistic. Short answer is yes, it is holistic, but it's got enough operationalization that we can kind of have a conversation more intellectually and logically, and that kind of helps the team kind of start to come together. Now, for example, again, in a hypothetical example, let's say, they may decide to say, we got a lot of focus on the left quadrant, and we can see that somebody that is, one of the quadrants that is not across, we can easily be able to, use that. So let's say this is Debbie from that team, and she could move there, or then maybe we got Jonathan from that team. So those things would be easy to cut across and be able to kind of focus. So it becomes a little bit more beneficial to be able to kind of see directionally where the team is going and how they can do that. And especially if a project is a very, very long project, especially if it is 6 months, a year, or longer, there will be phases of the project. For example, when you go through this process and create these dot points and the dotted black line that I have, maybe initially the emphasis may be more on the top quadrant where they have to do the brainstorming and they come up with the new ideas, et cetera, before they're going to take the ideas and convert it into tangible things. So you can have a diagram that starts out, and then you check it again, maybe a few months later, depending on the stage of the project, and you will see the transition. And that conversation, why we are heading from one to other, also becomes really, really important in the conversation, right? So in a nutshell, when you're doing a transformation of any kind, obviously you want to make sure that you have goals and objectives and technical skills and you have budgets and metrics. But what I'm showing you on the right side of the chart, the team dynamic skills and organizational alignment at any level, that is just super important. And if we can make that connection, then our chances of success really, really go up a lot. So again, for this hypothetical example, Jane had her team go through, and her upfront investment in the self and team awareness will help enhance her team dynamics and reduce the storming phase and be able to perform and achieve the goals more effectively and with less stress, and team will have more fun in doing that. So with that, thank you, and I will take any questions that that you may have.